Kelsey. And record straight to the cloud, and then we can get going.
Awesome, thank you. So with that being said, I tried not to say the name, but we already know who the keynote speaker is. So if we could head to the next slide, our closing keynote speaker is one of the nation's leading experts on pre-K through 12 school leadership, deeper learning, technology, and innovation. A professor of ed leadership at the University of Colorado, Denver, our speaker also founded the UCEA Center for the Advanced Study of Technology Leadership in Education, called CASTLE, and it's the only center of its kind in the United States that's dedicated to the tech needs of school admin. Our speaker was the co-creator of the 4 Shifts protocol for lesson and unit design and has written or edited 4 books and 170 articles and other publications. Our speaker works with hundreds of schools at the pre-K-12 and post-secondary level to support their efforts to truly make education relevant. It is a treat for our group and an honor to introduce Dr. Scott McLeod as our closing keynote speaker to discuss how deeper learning is an equity move.
Thanks so much for the nice intro. It's wonderful to be here with you today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right off, and we are just going to get right to it. So hopefully everybody can see. Come on. There we go. Got the spinning wheel of death. All right, cool. Hopefully everybody can see deeper learning as an equity move. Yes. All right, cool. So we only have about 37 minutes together, so we're going to roll quite quickly here. You will notice there's a web address there right at the lake's edge. And if you want to jot that down, I'll tell you very quickly what I'm doing here. So I'm actually joining you from Golden, Colorado, which is a suburb west of Denver. I teach class here at one of our school districts tonight for teachers who want to be principals. So if you ever want to come out and get your principal's license in Colorado, come on out. We'll take good care of you. I'm also the director of a center called CASTLE. As was mentioned, CASTLE is the only university center focused on the tech needs of school leaders, right? In other words, we know that we can invest all we want in teachers and coaches, and if they keep running to the brick wall of their admin, it just doesn't happen. So trying to work on those leadership behaviors and support structures that enable the sort of powerful learning and teaching that we're really trying to make happen here. I'm also a Virginia kid, Northern Virginia in Roanoke, did my undergrad and master's at William and Mary. My sisters both live in Charlottesville, so I get back there when I can. And so just very nice to be hanging with all my Virginia friends today. So thank you very much. So hopefully that was enough stalling for you all to get the web address. We'll throw that link into the chat box occasionally. Kelsey and Heather, if one of you would do that, that would be kind of you. Thanks as people join us. We're gonna have a conversation in 3 short acts. And I mean short because again, now we're down to like 35 minutes. So, and this is also going to be an interactive keynote. You're going to have a chance to talk with some others around some things. So our 3 acts that we're going to hit tonight are really around sort of relevance gaps, what's sort of the big picture around deeper learning and equity that sort of surrounds the work that we're trying to do in our schools. I'm going to really give you some robust examples of deeper learning here in Colorado, just to get you thinking, and then finally kind of wrap up with sort of the equity concerns that involve around that. And you'll have a chance to talk at the end of each of those 3 acts. So we're just going to dive right in with sort of the big picture context. Some of the stuff you may know, some of the stuff may be new to you. I think one of the things that we have found is that the twin forces of technology and globalization, of course, have upended everything over the past few decades. And what we see here, of course, is that society, the green line on the graph, is changing quite rapidly. Schools tend to not change as quickly. And so what that does is that creates relevance gaps for us, right, between what schools are able to provide and what society and our students and graduates actually need from us. And so I actually wrote a whole book on relevance gaps, sort of an urgency building book for people. We're not going to go into all that today, but I do want to highlight a couple here while I have you all with me. And the first one is really around information literacy. You know, we have this new information landscape. It looks very different from our old ink on paper landscape that some of us who are old grew up with. And bottom line is that it has changed a lot, right? We haven't lived through a shift like this since the invention of the printing press. And printing press was kind of a big deal. It actually, you know, blew up governments. It created new forms of religion. Like it was kind of a big deal. And we're now living through sort of a similar shift these days with the web. And so if our old, you know, ink on landscape, if our old ink on paper landscape looks like some of these things on the left, ink on paper, because it was expensive to publish, somebody made the decision about who got published and who was an expert and so on. And those anointed voices became experts, and the rest of us just consumed passively whatever the book publisher, magazine publisher, newspaper publisher, TV channel, radio station sent our way. Now, of course, we all have the possibility to have a voice in this sort of digital bits and ether landscape. Any of us can publish. And so it's great, right? Because we might surface voices like Brandon's and Heather's that we might not otherwise heard before. And on the flip side, there's also a lot of crap out there. So, but those filtering decisions have been shifted from the big entities to our own heads. And the evidence is very clear that we're not very good at it. In fact, for all the whining that we do around how bad our kids are at information literacy, the research shows that the older you get, the more likely you are to spread in misinformation and falsehoods and so on. So adults are even worse than the kids. And so we have a lot of wonderful information abundance out there where people are sharing in interactive and collaborative and real-time spaces, and nobody's filtering but us. And that has done some bad things for us. So we see that classroom teachers typically use this new landscape mostly as a consumption space, right? Kind of like pulling a library book off the shelf. We're going to send kids to a website or to a video or whatever, or to the learning management system. They're going to do something there, and then they're going to put it away and walk away from that. And I really love this quote from Mitch Resnick, which is being blocked right now by my Zoom bar, but it says, in the analog world, we would never say somebody was literate if they could read but not write. So can you be literate in this new information landscape if you're only consuming content and you're not also producing and participating and sharing and collaborating and so on? And I sort of love that idea, right? So, this is a challenge for many of our educators because, you can't teach what you don't know. And I think some of our educators are not living in these spaces very actively. They're not participating in robust online communities. And for others, they might be doing that, but they haven't figured out how to shift that work over to their school interactions with kids yet. So that's kind of our challenge. So that's sort of relevance gap number one. Second relevance gap is really around career readiness, which I think is pretty important to me and hopefully to you all. We're losing tens of millions of jobs to offshoring, which is where we take well-paying jobs in the US and we send them to countries overseas where labor costs are a fraction of what we pay here in the United States. We're losing tens of millions of jobs to outsourcing, where we might take Kelsey's in-house job in the company and outsource it to an outside contractor. Like, we'll just get rid of the entire accounting department, and Kelsey's welcome to go work for them too, but now she's doing gig work for a contract worker. Her benefits might be iffy and so on. We're moving those in-house jobs out to the lowest bidder. And then finally, we're losing jobs, of course, to automation, both physical automation, like you used to put screws in car doors at the factory. Now an industrial robot does that. And also we're losing jobs to automated software and so on. And the sum total of all that, when you put it all together, is that we see this bifurcation of the American economy. So these blue and green lines on the graph show us that if your job involves non-routine thinking work, either analytical or interpersonal, the number of jobs available to you has grown steadily since the 60s. And if you're in any kind of manual labor job or any kind of low level thinking job, the number of jobs available to you has remained stagnant or declined over the last few decades. This is a gradual process. It doesn't all happen at once, but the end result is sort of the middle category of jobs just disappears. Showing this another way, you can see here that we've got three categories of jobs: low skill, mid skill, and high skill. Those are the terms that the labor economists use, not me. And you can see nice steady growth decade by decade. Those are the different bars for the blue jobs, right? Professional, technical, managerial, those higher level thinking jobs. Over on the left-hand side, so those jobs are also important, but they're considered low skill jobs, low education jobs, low training jobs, and so on. And you see generally a decline or a stagnation there, except for a slight bump in healthcare workers as our population ages, right? And so the person who takes care of your aging grandmother as a home healthcare aide is doing really important work, but we're not paying that person anything. And then the whole middle category of jobs, the orange ones, are just dropping like a stone, right? So that's the previous graph shown another way. We're also seeing the same patterns in Europe. This graph is a little hard to read, but you can see, for example, if you look at Ireland on the left, a small bump in low paying jobs, that's the blue line, a higher bump in higher paying, high skilled jobs, those brown line, and the whole middle, that orange graph just drops out the bottom. And that's true for country after country after country after country. Every developed country is seeing the same thing. So whether we're talking about Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Singapore, Israel, right, all of Europe and so on, similar patterns in any sort of high wage, high education country. We know exactly what those blue and green lines on the graph look like, right? It's this stuff. We want kids to be thinkers and problem solvers and powerful innovators and communicators and collaborators. They're tech fluent, they're information literate, they're globally competent, and so on. Unfortunately, when we walk down the halls in most schools and we see what do kids do on a day-to-day basis, 80 to 85% of what they do is low-level mental work. It's that traditional factual recall and procedural regurgitation that we have always centered in schools. And so the challenge for us, of course, is that that work is the lowest bar of the graph. You know, it's not our job as schools to prepare worker bees for the corporate world, but at the same time, we want them to be able to have a life, raise a family, and so on, provide for themselves. So that's kind of the challenge. So let's send you into some discussion groups to react to sort of these relevance gaps that I just shared with you. And let's see if we can have a good conversation for a few minutes, whatever your reactions are to whatever I just showed you, okay? So I'm gonna send you in a breakout group for about 3 minutes, share whatever thoughts are in your head right now at this stage of the keynote, and we will see you soon. All right, welcome back, everybody. Hope that everybody had a chance to spill the tea a little bit and have a good discussion. We're going to just keep on rolling here with part 2. Remember, this is a three-act conversation. So there we go. So let's talk about deeper learning. So we actually know that that a lot of kids are just bored out of their minds at school, right? Like the national engagement data from the Gallup folks are just horrendous. You know, they start serving like almost 1 million kids, in, you know, as early as 5th grade. 3 out of 4 kids in 5th grade say the learning is engaging, but we've already lost 1 out of 4. That's not great. And as you move up the grade, you're lucky if 1 out of 3 high school kids says, yes, my learning is engaging at my school. So that's pretty rough. It's no wonder if Gallup asks follow-up questions like, are you learning something interesting? Are you having fun? Are you getting to do what you do best every day? And the answer routinely is no, no, and no. I'm sorry, I'm trying to navigate the Zoom thing here. So the schools that I'm working with are really focused on 4 big shifts, sort of that shift around higher level thinking. How do we up the cognitive complexity beyond factual recall and regurgitation up to those richer, more robust critical thinking and problem solving avenues that we know kids need? How do we give kids more agency and ownership and voice and choice in their own learning, which is also a huge motivation factor? How do we connect kids' work to real world contexts outside of school in ways that are meaningful so that they can find relevance in a different way? And then finally, of course, that analog to digital shift, because we want kids to be tech fluent and information literate, but also because technology is an incredibly powerful lever to do those first 3 shifts. So I'm going to tell you 3 stories from Colorado here real quick. This is sort of the kind of deeper learning that we're talking about here. See if I can turn that off. Good. Just to sort of give you an example of the kind of deeper learning that I'm talking about here. So story number 1 is about sharks. We don't have a lot of sharks in Colorado, but I want you to watch this video for just a second. Okay, so the question I have for you is not whether or not you get in the cage. The question I have for you is, how long is the shark? Now that's an interesting question, right? Like it's an interesting question you would figure out, how would we even measure this shark? It's murky, the shark is moving around, we don't have any reference points. The silt makes it hard to see, and nonetheless, you can imagine that a marine biologist, such as one that works at Oceans First in Boulder, Colorado, needs to answer that question. So I'm gonna give you 45 seconds to think on that for a minute. How would you even measure this shark? Put your solutions in the chat box. Have fun. Five more seconds. Nice. So this is an actual problem faced by some high school students here in Colorado. That marine biologist in Boulder, Colorado, connected with some high schoolers here nearby. And this is their solution, right? So what you see here is the device is actually upside down. The handle is pointing up. The bottom part is actually a GoPro mount. You can put a camera on there to take still pictures and video, and the 2 ends are lasers. So here's the assistant superintendent of the school district modeling how this device is used. And so they calibrated it with different images of sharks up on the wall, and then they shipped it down to be used in the water by the marine biologist. Worked great, it was awesome. And so essentially, right, then you can take a still of the shark, get your fixed endpoints, and then measure the distance in between. Works awesome, works great. Story number 2 from Colorado around deeper learning is around frogs. So this is Lake Titicaca in Peru. And unfortunately, the wild frog population there is declined rapidly. We see something like an 80% decline over the last couple generations. And so they're now critically endangered species. So some scientists at the Denver Zoo are working with scientists down in Peru to try and preserve this frog population. And they heard about the work that these high schoolers did on the shark project. So they pulled some high schoolers in to try and figure out how to handle this. One of the challenges is that It's really hard to collect data in high altitude diving environments like this one, because all of the standard decompression tables for scuba divers are set for sea level. So the general rule for high altitude is stay shallow and stay under for short periods of time, because otherwise you'll build up bad gases in your blood system. So the high schoolers in the school district now have access to an aquatic robotics initiative, right? So here's the big tank where they test their different robots. And so it might be a surface robot, like the one with the red and yellow pontoons that you see here. Might also be an underwater robot like that white robot on the left, sort of toward the back, where they can go underwater and collect data around different environmental conditions and so on. What's cool about this project is that the students design and create and build and test their robots here in Colorado, and then they ship them down to the scientists in Peru. They're also engaged in other sort of non-STEM activities, such as community awareness and environmental protection activities, including creating a Spanish language comic book that's meant to help the local community understand the importance of these frogs. What I love about this project is that these aren't necessarily, A+ kids. These are like kids who are, getting C's and sometimes D's, but they've got a meaningful project to work on and they're rocking it. And for many of them, Spanish is their primary language, not English, and that's an asset in this project, not a disadvantage, because now they can communicate directly with the scientists Peru as they troubleshoot the application of the robots in the local context, which is pretty boss. Story 3 is about space. If you head west of Denver to Lakewood High School, you might run into this kid or his classmates. You can see he's wearing a self-designed harness right now. The idea behind the harness is that this was completely created and crafted and built by a student team. And what they're trying to do here is they're trying to figure out how can you keep astronauts fit in space. Now that's an interesting challenge, right? Because you can't take up weights up into space or other sort of workout equipment generally, because every ounce counts when you're going up, out of the atmosphere. And you also have problems, like you don't have a lot of room, so you can't create a running track or whatever. So you may notice in this picture that this kid actually has a belt that runs from a D-ring at chest level down through his legs and up the back. And what you see here is that he's actually modeling how you might use this harness, attaching a resistance cable from the floor to the D-ring. And so the idea for this team is that you can attach a resistance cable from a wall or a floor or a ceiling to different attachment points on the harness and engage in resistance training. And that might be a relatively easy way to keep astronauts fit up in space. Lakewood High School is part of the NASA Hunch program, where they're trying to solve different problems that people face up in outer space. And Lakewood generally sends various kids down to Houston every year to pitch their ideas, pitch their projects, and they have a very strong record of getting projects up on the International Space Station almost every year, which is pretty cool. This is an example of another student team's project. They're trying to figure out how do you keep your clothes clean in outer space when you don't really have a lot of water. So it can create some kind of collapsible bucket structure with ultraviolet lighting. It might have like about 10 milliliters of water to play with and a few chemicals. And you're just seeing how they're prototyping and testing this and doing bacteria testing and so on to try and keep clothes clean. And I think what we see here in all three of these projects is we see really strong student agency in terms of driving the work, right? It's real world authentic work. The kids find meaning in this kind of work that's much different from sort of the isolated, disconnected activities that we often have them engage in our classes. And then we also are seeing, of course, a lot of really robust critical thinking and problem solving, and the technology is just there to help with it. Tech is not the goal, tech is the vehicle to help them do the work. And we see school after school all around the country, all around the world that are starting to lean into this kind of work. So I'm going to send you right back into your breakout groups again to talk about what do you think about this kind of learning that I showed for you here today that's happening in Colorado, and what kind of deeper learning are you seeing in your own schools? Have a good chat. I'll see you soon. All right, we continue to share with each other and learn with each other. Let's do one more round here. This is actually the most important act, the third act, as we talk about the equity issues that go with this. Remember, the title of this talk is Deeper Learning as an Equity Move. And there are a number of equity concerns around the work that I just showed you. Number one being, of course, that schools have evolved a number of mechanisms to catch kids up. We might call them things like the FIT block, the focused instructional time, or the WIN period, the what I need period, or some kind of thing, right? And what we know about these blocks of time, as we think about tier 2 and maybe tier 3 interventions, we think about catching kids up or learning loss or whatever, is that during those blocks of time, some kids get to go over here and get to do really cool stuff, right? Like they're building rockets and they're playing with robots and, you know, they're coding and creating apps and websites and playing around with green screens and multimedia and all that. And then there's those kids. Those kids over here get shoved in some kind of direct instruction, tutoring, maybe we stick them in front of a cubicle and they're going through some kind of self-paced drill and kill software and no math or literacy or whatever. And we know exactly who those kids are, right? Those kids are the same kids over and over again. The kids who get over here and get these rich, robust learning experiences tend to be white, middle class, affluent, high social capital families and kids. And then the kids over here tend to be kids of color, kids whose families are low income, kids whose primary language is not English, kids with disabilities, and so on, right? And so the various structures that we're creating to close achievement gaps, right, these FIT blocks and WIN blocks and whatever, are actually exacerbating in many ways some life success gaps. Because the same kids that probably need it the most are never going to get a chance to do these robust, deeper learning opportunities. We see the same thing play out in school choice modalities. School choice is big here in Colorado. So if you come to Denver, for example, and you say, where can kids get these rich, robust, deeper learning opportunities? And the school district will say, oh, we've got 5 or 6 schools that do that. You can just choose one of those. And I always wonder, what about the other 195 schools in Denver? What do those kids get? They don't get much. Carlos Moreno, who's the executive director of Big Picture Learning, says innovation work is equity work these days. And I think we all have to examine our moral urgency about making school different. In other words, who decides and who gets to be life ready and who doesn't in your school systems? And how do we ensure equity of access to those deeper learning and life readiness activities? So I'm going to send you back in your groups one last time to talk about in your school system, are you seeing those inequities that I just labeled here? In other words, who in your school district gets to be life ready and who doesn't in the global innovation society? Have a good chat. See you soon. All right, friends, welcome back. As you can see, it's quite a sprint for 40 minutes to talk about some big issues here. But, hopefully you're having some good conversations in your breakout groups about some of these issues and concerns. As I think about my own work, I shared, for example, that I read a whole book on just sort of outlining some of these relevance gaps and trying to create some urgency for people. I think we're seeing that urgency in Virginia at a policy level, right? You have this new profile of a Virginia graduate. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen with that, with your new, leadership turnover there recently, but hopefully we'll continue to lean into that work in terms of what does it really mean to prepare future-ready graduates. School systems that are designed for factual recall and regurgitation are very different from school environments that are designed for critical thinking and problem solving. And so, I know that school divisions all across Virginia are really trying hard to lean into this work and trying to figure out what does it mean to really prepare a future-ready graduate these days. I think we keep running into sort of the historical inertia of teaching practice and schooling practices, right? My most favorited tweet of all time is this one, right? You want student learning to change, but you don't want to change teaching or schooling. Good luck with that, right? And I think what we just keep running into over and over again is that a lot of schools are really struggling to figure out how to lean into these kinds of shifts and move in some new directions. So that's sort of an ongoing challenge. We do know that if we want those shifts of deeper learning and more agency by kids and more real-world authentic work and rich technology integration, that we have to design for them. They don't just happen by magic. And most of our school systems are not designed with those in mind. So if you were not in my breakout session a couple days ago, there is a free 4 shifts protocol. This is an instructional redesign protocol that may be useful to you as tech interested educators. It's free. Just go to bit.ly/4 shifts and check it out, and drop me a note if you ever want to learn more about that or have some further conversations around that. There's also a book if you feel like playing around in the printed space. Because I'm a leadership guy, most of my work is around leaders and school systems and those sort of leadership behaviors and support structures that allow that learning and teaching to happen. And so really trying to live in that space too. I think, I'm trying to just figure out how do we get beyond our fears, our control needs, our assumptions about what school should look like, that historical inertia, and mostly all those yes buts that everybody always comes up with, and instead lean into those new visions of student possibility and really think about why not and how can we instead of yes but. So I'm going to leave you with these questions. What do you want your students and graduates to be? And more importantly, what are you willing to do to get them? I'm tired of walking down the halls of schools that have mission statements and learner profiles and graduate profiles that say blah, 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 future ready, blah, blah, blah. And then classroom teaching still looks the same on a day-to-day basis. So really I would encourage all of you to lean into that last question of what are we really willing to do to get the kind of students we say we want. Remember that all of those resources are available at that web address. You're welcome to use these slides any way you want. My contact information is at the top of the resources page. Otherwise, we're going to wrap this up, and I'm just going to say enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks for letting me be with you here today, and be well, Virginia. I miss you all. So holler as I can be of help to you in the weeks and months and years to come. Okay, stay in touch. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. That was amazing. So much food for thought. And I saw in the chat, people said this is like speed dating, and it was great. It was just enough time to get started and keep us interested in the next bit. So we definitely appreciate it. And we will be in touch with a token of appreciation from our committee. But I'm sure the entire group, again, as you can tell in the chat, they very much enjoyed it as well. So at this point, we have 10 minutes before our next session. So if you need to take a break, head over to the vendors in Discord to see what they're up to. We will see you in the first breakout session at 4:50. Thank you.
Bye, friends. Thanks so much. Heather, got to tell you, some of those shark suggestions were awesome. Shark comments, I'm like, nice. Okay, how's the conference been going?